So jumps for the consortium program, we're going to go over all 4 jumps: the long jump, triple jump, high jump, and pole vault. Skills required for these jumps and jump success, and what are the rules. One thing that I'm looking forward to in the coaches forum for the jumps is getting a lot deeper within the jumps. So for this, I'm just going to do more of a general overview, but theoretically, there are a lot more detailed components to all the jumps. And when it comes to getting used to it, like I explained earlier with Coach Harry Mara, at first when he told me a story, when he wrote down everything he knows, but about all the different events, it was like 2 paragraphs. And then after a while, it just became a couple sentences, just because the more you understand it, the simpler it becomes. And one event that I know that most coaches would at least admit to having a hard time kind of comprehending or getting is high jump and pole vault. Those are considered some of the more technical aspects, even though they're, long jump and triple jump are really technical, but most people can kind of wrap their minds around it. High jump and pole vault, just because there's so many like invisible forces of energy that are involved. A lot of people kind of coin those as, a little bit more obscure or overly technical, but they don't have to be that technical. So the rules are important because every association, every meet, every organization is going to have different rules, and how they employ those rules, like whether you go 3 and 3 for finals. And what are the big one that I, find is really important is the protest rule, because what's protestable at certain meets might not be at others. Like, do you have video, and is outside video allowed in terms of, justifying or contending a protest? Also being able to determine like how much time you have between events, and how to making sure you're communicating with the officials. And because just because there is a set of rules that are in place doesn't mean that everybody has the same implementation of those rules. So some officials, when it comes to how much time you have between jumps, some are a little bit more liberal, some are a little bit more like, hey, as soon as I say your name, I'm starting this stopwatch. So it's up to us as coaches to communicate with our athletes that not every competition is going to be the same, especially regarding, those more judgmental and subjective aspects of the rulings. But when it comes to the rules, knowing the rules is a distinct competitive advantage, and it's part of the tactical approach that we should be looking at when it comes to coaching and developing our jumpers and getting them ready for competition. When it comes to the general overview of what we're going to talk about is the approach, preparation for takeoff, the actual takeoff itself, and flight. In general, all the jumps have many commonalities. They're pretty similar in a lot of aspects. And so we want to make it as simple as we possibly can, not just for right now, but when we're coaching, because most of the time we're going to be coaching athletes that are doing more than one jump event. And only time where that you don't see that is like the pole vault. Then later on, like in college and stuff, you might see that in the high jump. But even through college, you'll see majority of long jumpers triple jumping, or vice versa. And later do people tend to specialize, but more so in the high jump and pole vault than the long jump and triple jump tandem. So when we look at how to develop the approach, and when I say this, I don't take it lightly, because the approach is single-handedly the most important part of the jumps. And that's all 4 of the jumps, because this is going to determine your takeoff position and your takeoff speed. And those are the 2 most critical elements to jumping success, is jumping position and jumping speed. So with that being said, how do you get the correct speed or velocity for takeoff with setting up the right position for takeoff? So the couple ways to start are the crouch start and the rollover start. When you look at this, majority of the time you want your athletes getting comfortable with starting with their jump foot in front and making sure that they're balanced, because sometimes athletes walk up and they just kind of are a little bit too lackadaisical when they're at their start mark, wherever that may be. And I don't want us to get too fixated on like a lot of international athletes or elite athletes that might do like a run in or a skip in. those should be treated as more individual characteristics of the approach and not what we would consider common practice. So the rollover start is when you start tall and long and you kind of drop into the crouch position to begin the acceleration. Balance is probably the most important and overlooked part about setting up your athlete's start position, because especially when the motion gets high and there's a lot of tension in the in the air, maybe it's their last jump, do athletes get a little bit more fidgety, and or even if they're beginning jumpers, they might be a little bit apprehensive, and so they might move their feet or shuffle around a little bit, and it's going to disrupt their start consistency. So I always tell them, especially in the beginning, that when we get on the runway, that we're getting on the runway with intent. We have to be very intentional and have purpose before we begin anything. So that's where you'll see even some athletes, be very elaborate with how they set up their, the beginning of their approach, and, like waving their arms, and there are a lot of theatrics sometimes, especially in the long jump. But this is all to get our athletes in a position to set up a good and positive drive phase. Drive phase is similar to the start position and what you would consider like the 100 or any other level of acceleration. The key term here is pushing. You want to push, you want to invest in the ground. You don't want them pitter patter or tip tapping or kind of shuffling their feet. You want strong, powerful steps. A lot of times our athletes will misconstrue these powerful steps as like reaching steps, and that's not what it is. So those ground contacts should be underneath or behind your center of mass. Then once the athlete gets consistent with that, and there's whole things like with check marks. Check marks are good to make sure that they're consistent in their drive phase, because if we might get a little hyped up or we might feel out of touch, the drive phase might change a little bit, but we want to make sure that drive phase is consistent, usually the first 4 to 6 steps. Then we kind of transition. I don't really talk about the transition here. It's a little bit more of an advanced component, but you don't go straight from like drive phase to popping straight up. You want to make sure that there's a smooth ascension to getting nice and vertical so that you can have this high velocity phase. This high velocity phase is kind of like high knee. I tell my athletes, you want to feel like you're running downhill. And if you don't have a good drive phase, you're not going to be able to transition into a good or quality high velocity sprint phase. And this high velocity sprint phase is really setting up our athlete stretch reflex, and also, ensuring that they're going to have proper posture once they get to the penultimate step, which is the last 2 steps. We look at the last 3 sometimes, but because you want to push and roll through the penultimate step. But those last 2 steps, there's going to be some lowering of the center of mass prior to takeoff. The only ones that there's not a lot of lowering, or you want to kind of almost avoid a lot of the lowering, are pole vault and triple jump, because speed at takeoff takes precedent over the trajectory, and lowering your center of mass is really just setting up trajectory or your ability to get vertical at takeoff. And so those are some of the general aspects of how to develop the approach. So one thing that I do in our practice, and kind of going back, is I'll work drive phase, and I'll kind of give them a zone, and we'll just work, all right, how to set up your jump, and just work the drive phase. Then next, I'm going to introduce, all right, now from this cone to this cone, I want you to transition. So I don't want you to pop straight up. I want you to invest at least 2 to 3 steps into like that drive phase, those low shin angles to vertical, and nothing after that. To just kind of like phase out or just kind of stride out after. Then we kind of take it to the point to where now we're doing phases where I have cones set up. Okay, you're in a drive phase here, transition here, high velocity from this cone to this cone, and then decelerate. And so now I broke it up into those different phases. They've experienced them. Now I can give them like technical feedback on what they're doing and how they're doing it, so that when we do get to the runway and we are preparing for the jump practice, that any cue I give them on their approach is a little bit more relatable. So concepts for instructing the jumps. The big thing is controlling your environment, making sure it's safe, making sure that the athletes are safe, knowing the rules, making sure that you have all the pits, and there's not any debris inside of the sand pits, because any of those things can put our athletes in a compromised position, especially relating to their health. So we want to make sure our athletes are healthy. We want to make sure they're safe. even protocol about how to get back in line. Like say you have jumpers, do you walk across the runway? How do you fill the pit? Do you put the crossbar up? You know, if you're done with your jump, what do you do next? How do you exit the landing system for pole vault and high jump? These are all things that we have to actually teach our athletes. And every year, I don't care how long they've been with me or how experienced they are, I'm constantly trying to reiterate some of those rules and expectations when it comes to the safety and protocols that we might have in place. We want to manage the competition or manage the environment and what they're doing and the technique and communicate our expectations, because you know I said it a lot already, but it's not practice doesn't make perfect, it's perfect practice that makes perfect. And so it's up to us as coaches to ensure that we're teaching them correctly, that we're giving them sound and realistic expectations when it comes to what we're asking them to do in the jumps. And so a lot of times we're asking them to get out of their comfort zone. What does that mean? That this athlete has to trust us. And if there's no trust, and if we're not communicating in our expectations consistently, then that's going to disrupt that learning curve for that athlete. Do not overload a jump practice. The worst thing you can say at a jump practice is one more, right? And I hear that quite a bit, because you know, as coaches, we're watching the jump practice. We don't get tired. And our athletes, most of the time, they're very competitive and they just want to keep going. And sometimes it's really fun and you might feel that you can get more, but you know, the term that is used and is like beating a dead horse. There comes a point to where you have to learn how to just, you know, the cost benefit analysis is overly weighed to the athlete potentially getting hurt. So it's up to us to put our athletes in a position of success and protecting them from themselves. Sound pedagogy looks like just good, clear teaching pedagogy. For instance, you know, if you're an athlete jumps and your feedback is, oh, hey, that was good, and jump further, or I didn't like that, or don't do this. Okay. That's criticism, but that's not coaching. That's not teaching. You have to give them feedback. And it doesn't always have to be positive feedback, but it has to be feedback that is relatable to them. And a lot of times it's when I go back to, you know, that statement, what did you feel? Well, you have to teach the athlete what your expectations are and teach them what the sensations that they're trying to search for are. And you could do this through drills, you can do this through mimicking or mirroring, but you can't ask them to reflect on something they have never experienced. That's just not realistic. And so that being said, when it comes to other things like criticisms, it's important for us to kind of look at the justification of why or how those things happened, not just tell them it was bad or good or whatever. We have to let them know that, hey, this happened because of this. This is what we're looking for. And then you can give them drills or feedback or use video. You can use something to help further that. If it's something that's very detrimental to their performance, you can maybe then break it down into a smaller piece and start working on that performance or that drill and executing at that in a smaller segment, and then trying to plug it back into the big picture and see if that has any you know, impact on the overall technical model that you're searching for. Developing the basics. So multiple jumps are good because it helps with getting the athlete used to being coordinated. So you can change these up with double arm, single arm, off 2 feet, off 1 foot, alternating legs. But then plyometrics are a little bit different because this includes like things like bounding and eccentric loads, might be depth jumps, might be, you know, multiple jumps from the exclusion of like doing single leg bounds and so on and so forth. But in a little bit, you can even make those event specific, whether it's the high jump, pole vault, or triple jump. And you can change up the scenery, you can change up the load. One big thing that we want to take away from this, and I'll provide the resource on the Blackboard, is making sure we're progressing our plyometrics smoothly, that our athletes are learning from simple to complex. And, you know, we're taking all the general and more simpler aspects of these more complicated plyometrics, break them down so our athletes can learn, you know, in a progressive fashion. Sprinting, they have to sprint. You know, my jumpers, we might do some, you know, approach work, Then we do a sprinting workout. Then we'll do like an actual jumping technique workout, mostly involving short approach jumps. But then come back Thursday, we're sprinting again, because the speed and running mechanics cannot be overlooked. I don't care what jumping event, the athlete's ability to sprint plays a major role in their success in the jumps. Strength training, different ages, different talent levels are going to require different levels or implementation of strength training. If they've never experienced strength training before, make sure their general strength is nice and high, like they can do a fair amount of push-ups up to anywhere between 30 to 50, regardless of sets and reps. But they got to be able to do body squats. They have to do lunges, some of these more general calisthenic exercises as well, that they can do those things before you start having to do box squats or front squats or deadlifts or power cleans. You want to make sure the general strength and the body weight exercises are crisp before you progress on. So the progression of strength training and strength training implementation for our jumpers is going to be highly contingent on the individual. Core, remember, core is like from our shoulders to below our hips. The core training is important because of the amount of force that we experience in the jumping events. And if we don't have a strong pillar, that we're going to not be able to handle some of the force generated with certain jumps. And so core cannot be overlooked. Core can be developed in a variety of different ways throughout the warm-up. You can have a specific workout, or you can implement it in the cool down or the strength and conditioning component of your training plan. So long jump basics, and I'm just going to go through the 4 jumps and kind of give some general overview of like the specific aspects of each of the 4 jumps. Approach specifics, they're going to be looking like anywhere between 7 to 9 steps, and we're just talking about the jump leg, counting the jump leg. And when you look at the long jump, speed is a primary component to success, but it's maximum controlled speed at takeoff. And when we do this, like I said, drive phase is probably the most commonly miscued and disruptive thing for jump success for a lot of long jumpers. So get their drive phase down, get them to transition to good high velocity sprint mechanics. Then now we're looking at setting up for the takeoff. What we have to do is make sure that we teach them that they have to go flat or full foot without breaking. You don't want them scuffing the ground. You want them still running through. And you always hear those last 2 steps should be quick. How do you get those last 2 steps quick? Well, this is low heel recovery. You just make sure that they're not, if they have this big cyclical running action, that those last 2 steps are just like stepping over the heels to be able to put them in a position to get those last 2 steps down quick, but not make their body over rotate, so that when they plant their foot, that they're able to get the trajectory and hip posturing necessary for a good takeoff. So takeoff, we want to make sure that our foot is a little bit in front of our center of mass with a full foot, call it like a flat foot. And then once that hits, there has to be some separation with the knees to help the stretch reflex, but it's a little bit more advanced. But when they take off, there has to be full and continuous firing from the glutes all the way through that takeoff leg. And they want to drive their knee, but the drive knee shouldn't be over taught or overemphasized. That should be a reaction to good takeoff positioning. And if that happens, you get the stretch reflex to be able to let the knee come through that stretch. Once that knee comes through, it has a good figure 4, and you're getting full and continuous firing off the board. You want your center of mass to actually pass your foot, quite a bit, almost about a foot or 2 feet past your takeoff foot, as you leave that toe on that toe board to where your hips are starting to rise and ascend. So once that happens, then we can go into like the hang or the hitch kick. A lot of our athletes are going to do these things a little bit more naturally. So kind of watch what they do just on their own without a lot of instruction, and then take what they're doing. And if it's way off, then, go hang. But if, they kind of look like they're kind of like running through the air, then we can tell them just maybe start looking at the hitch, right? But predetermining those things before you even work with the athlete is a common error. Typical jump practice is going to look like the warm-up has to be specific to what I'm expecting that day. I might even infuse some technical or event specific technical pieces within the warm up. I'm putting my athlete in a position where they're going to be accelerating towards the end, so where their nervous system is ready to go. We're going to do some walkthrough stuff where I'm going to probably do a little bit more dialogue where I'm talking about what I'm expecting for that practice or what the emphasis from a technical perspective is going to be for that practice. And then once that happens, then we'll do maybe a drill or two, or maybe kind of mimic a drill or two, do some more approach work, and then break it down to where we're doing short approach jumps, anywhere between 4 to 10 steps. And that's actual steps like strides. And we're taking off doing those short approach jumps, working on that technical theme for the day. I'm not taking any more than, I mean, for like a really highly trained, developed athlete, we might get to 10. But I'm looking at a range between 6 and 10. And so, especially after it gets past 6, I'm being hypercritical on their energy levels and what's happening. If things aren't connecting, the goal is to live to fight another day. The typical week, like I kind of went through before, is most of the time during season, that Monday, we're going to come back and we're just going to be doing more sprint work training. Then on Tuesday or in the middle of the week, we're going to do a very highly technical thing. Maybe then like an active recovery day the following day, then do another like sprint workout kind of day. Then even within that sprint workout day, I might be doing some approach work and like approach dynamic stuff. But then we're going to be doing meet prep and then maybe compete on that Saturday. But majority of my practice time, if I just cut out of that whole week, what am I doing that's, long jump specific, or even pretty much for all the jump specific for that week, almost regardless of where I am in the season. Majority of it is going to be spent on training the approach. I'm almost at the most, I'm, 100%, all the way down to about 60% of my practice is all going to be approach work. So that's how strongly I believe in it. And when it comes to that, that usually pays off towards the end of the year when it comes to being able to have a consistent approach with, knowing where your athlete's going to be, and avoiding inconsistencies with the takeoff position, and also the speed and the mechanics and the execution of it. So triple jump approach specifics are, you're probably not going to be bringing full speed at the takeoff board, but you want to try to bring maximum control speed through the board, I like to say. Long jump, you want to bring your max control speed to the board. Triple jump, you want to bring your max control speed through the board. And through the board, I mean, there's not a lot of penultimate, there's not a lot of setup. So this takeoff position is going to be a little bit more full foot, but you're not going to lower the hips, because if you lower the hips, you're going to get too much of a vertical component. The typical jump practice for a triple jumper is I'm not going to overload their bounds, but I'm going to make sure that I keep count of their ground contacts, and I might infuse their bounds. So like later in the season, I'm going to spread their workout out throughout the whole week. So they might actually be doing some kind of triple jump training almost every day that week, but it's going to be very, very small, quick, short, not a lot of pounding. Early in the season, I'm going to pick 2 or 3 days where I'm going to really destroy the athlete. I'm going to go hard, and it's almost like, it's pretty much like some people would call like hell week or something, but it's going to be the most intense practices. They're going to be beat up, but I'm going to give them ample rest and recovery. And hopefully that, we build that work capacity to a small incremental, scope to be able to last the season. So that's kind of what that would look like for the triple jump. High jump, early season, one thing I kind of say that kind of throws people for a loop, but for me personally, I like to train my high jumpers like quarter milers almost, just because I talk a lot about like rhythm, tempo running, making sure that their core is strong, making sure that they are understanding of the strength endurance of running and being able to balance and handle those ground contacts, because running essentially is like bounding, but I'm not doing it for the metabolic part. I'm doing it more for like the load and the strength that they can build maybe instead of like doing a bunch of bounds or jumps, but getting it from the running, and then, you know, quickly shift them. I mean, they're probably not doing more than 30 days worth or something, but when we get into jump practice, I mean, there's some weeks, there's some times where we might go weeks, or not weeks, maybe 2 weeks at the most without actually jumping. We'll do a lot of drills, and we'll do a whole ton of approach work, short approach work, long approach work, pop-up work, you know, just walking through our approach. So there's a lot more emphasis in the jump practice for the approach. And if I was like 60%, you know, with the long or the triple, I'm probably, you know, maybe 80 you know, going from 100% all the way down to maybe 20% of our practices throughout the year are averaging, you know, more so on that in terms of like the jump to approach work ratio. Pole vault, pole vault. I mean, I love training the pole vault because it's so much fun. Pole vault coaches are a little funny because sometimes some of them overemphasize a lot of things that probably don't need to be overemphasized, but there are a lot of considerations for pole vault. The pole vault, you know, the standards can move, so the crossbar isn't fixed like all the other events. Like, you know where the long jump board is, you know where the triple jump board is, and you know where the high jump crossbar is. The pole vault crossbar is actually, you can move it and you can adjust it. The box in terms of what you take off is fixed, but the actual place where you take off, the takeoff location is going to change. And so there are so many more variables in the pole vault, which is why it's construed as one of the more technical events, and understandably so, because of the simple fact that of the increased variables, one, but the inability to mimic the sensation of the event outside of doing it. A lot of these events, like, I can make you feel like you did a full long jump from doing a short approach long jump. Same thing with high jump, same thing with triple. And you can do a lot of drills to almost mimic the actual sensation of those jumps. That's very almost impossible to do unless you're actually pole vaulting. And it's almost impossible to do sometimes in a PR sense because you're on a different pole, a pole that you probably never touched before. And the poles have different ratings in terms of their, so they're going to change in terms of how long they are. They're also going to change in their density or how stiff they are. And those weight ratings or those stiffness ratings are going to change from pole to pole. An athlete isn't going to just stick with one pole throughout the whole year kind of thing, where you hope that they don't. So those are things that are going to change quite a bit. And when we look at how to train the jumps, we're looking at approach work. One thing within the approach that we have to consider now with pole vault is the pole drop, and how we allow the pole to go from holding it straight up and down where it's more vertical to where our hands are up and the pole tip is actually going into the pole vault slide box, or I mean the takeoff box. And from there, there's the takeoff, which is a full and continuous firing, but then there's a swing component because most of the time through even mid to high level vaulters, the pole's going to bend, and you want to time that bend with swinging back, getting vertical, and then allowing the pole to recoil. So then now you can actually execute, push off the pole to try to work on your bar clearance. You're going to be clearing the bar on the front, then compared to the high jump where you're doing it on your back. In my jump practices, especially in season, I'm maybe doing, I'm trying to do our actual jump days early, and then our technical and approach work later, and then we compete, right? And then competing is actually kind of like a jump day. So I'm really only working pole vault specifically 2 days a week outside of the actual competition. They're going to be doing their conditioning, their strength training. A lot of my strength training for my pole vaulters is event specific. So I'm making sure that I'm doing things in the weight room that are actually going to correlate directly to the pole vault. And also they're running. Many times they're running, they're going to be holding a pole. There's going to, especially early in the season, a lot of their running workouts they're going to be holding a pole vault pole. So, you know, and that's just kind of like what it is. Sometimes I'll even do bleachers or like stadiums or hill runs with a pole vault pole. So the big thing with the high jump is obviously with 5 and 5 on the approach, but Like I said, I'll go through more of the specifics of the actual high jump and our coaching forum. And so hopefully you guys got a general overview and got some information from this. And I'll be linking some more information and some videos in the class or the course information section on Blackboard. So if there are any questions on the jumps, feel free to reach out to me. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the coaches forum. Thanks.